I'm going to tell you a story about one of the finest drinks made in these British Isles. A drink made from fantastic old varieties of fruit, from brilliant traditional orchards such as this. They truly are the best of what British drinks can offer. But this is a story not about cider. This is a story about perry. My name is Gabe Cook, and today I'm the perryologist. So just what is perry? Well, if cider is made from apples, then perry is made from pears. Now, traditionally, in these perry growing, in this perry making area, very specific varieties of pears are used to make this drink. We're not talking about the pears that you would know from cooking and eating, things like conference or 𝗪𝗿 𝗬𝗏. We are talking about specific varieties that have been grown for the sole purpose of making this drink for hundreds of years. Now, what characterizes these perry pear varieties is the presence of some acidity to provide some vibrancy and some sharpness, some sweetness provided by an unfermentable sugar called sorbitol, but very crucially a property called tannin. Now, tannin is what you also get in the classic West Country cider apple varieties. It helps provide mouthfeel, structure and integrity. It can provide some mouth drying sensation and contribute some earthy, rich characters. Now, these classic perry pear varieties, they don't look like pears as you would normally know them. They're much smaller. They can be squat, they can be round, they can be the size of marbles, they can be rock hard, they can be super mushy. But they all contain this property called tannin, and that's what gives them this extra character. If somebody ever offers you a bite of a perry pear, you must have done something to annoy them because they taste horrible, and you will quite possibly spit them out. And so these pears make this magical drink that we call perry. A rare drink that it is, it naturally comes out still, but you can carbonate it, you can naturally sparkle it, you can make a single variety, you can utilize a blend, you can ferment it or mature it in oak. It can be the most wonderful evocation and celebration of an orchard and of a landscape or of the local terroir. It really is one of the most magic drinks to make. Cider is made all over these British Isles, but perry is traditionally concentrated into one specific particular region, that of the three counties of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and the adjoining county over the border into Wales, Monmouthshire. In the heart of this area lies a particular landmark called May Hill. Now, it's quite innocuous, it's not particularly tall, only about 300 meters or 900 feet, but it's quite recognizable once you get to know it because it has a stand of Corsican pines planted atop, planted in commemoration of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. And the old saying goes, if you're within sight of May Hill, then you truly are in perry pear country. Now, why is this so? You could say it was down to the terroir. This is a term that is utilized in wine to describe the place, the landscape, the weather, the topography having a positive impact over the land and the opportunity to grow particular fruits and the resultant drinks made from it. Here in this three counties region, within sight of May Hill, the soils are rich, the underlying geology is good and strong, and also it sits at the head of the Severn estuary of the Bristol Channel. It is thought the weather systems move their way up, the right amount of precipitation, the right amount of sunshine. But there is another thought, another theory, a story, a pagan story. Let me tell you this, and it starts at the creation of the earth itself, at the Genesis, when the gods, plural, pagan story, were sat atop May Hill lording over the splendor of their creation. When suddenly there is the sound of a small godling coming running up the hill, clutching a piece of fruit in its hand. And breathlessly it gets to the top of the hill and proclaims, "I have found the elixir of life." So the chief god swipes the fruit from the little one and says, "All right, I better have a taste," and chomps down on the fruit. But suddenly his face gurns in horror and disgust and he spits out the fruit and says, "This isn't the elixir of life, this is bloody horrible." And the little godling goes, "No, you're not supposed to eat the pear. You're supposed to squeeze it and extract the juice and make perry from it, for that truly is the elixir of life. Of course, it's too late by this point. The chief god has spat out the pear, and the pips have scattered throughout the land, and from the ground rise these magnificent and majestic perry pear trees. So we are here at Helens in the village of 𝗪𝗏 in Herefordshire, in the epicentre of traditional perry pear country. Helens is one of the oldest houses in England, and like any self-respecting manor house, it has a beautiful long undulating driveway leading up to it. And it has an avenue of trees, but here, no oaks, no beeches, perry pear trees. And the original trees, the primary, the large trees here, were planted in 1710 to commemorate the coronation of Queen Anne. These are 300-plus-year-old perry pear trees, and demonstrates the longevity of these trees, but also the high regard that they were taken into account to be placed here on this driveway at the manor house. And this driveway harbours some wonderful varieties. Behind me you can see here Helen's Early, named after the estate here. And it's one of the more famous varieties in this particular area, but very, very locally utilised. This is known as the Perry Pear Book, and it was produced by the Long Ashton Research Station in the 1960s. And it was an endeavour to record and understand these different varieties, the habits of the tree, and the nature and the properties of the juice that the pears provided. And although 60 years on from its publication, it's still the foremost authority on these fantastic trees, these varieties, and the resultant drinks. And it's a really magical experience as somebody like me to grab this book and to go to a fantastic orchard and to see the actual trees here in real life that are recorded in the book. One of the magical but also quite challenging aspects of perry is that so many of the varieties have been lost, or if they do exist, they're in very small number. Behind me is a variety called waterlug, and this is the only known mature specimen of this variety anywhere in existence. So this is one of the wonderful sights that one has the opportunity to see when they're here in the heart of perry pear country. These beautiful old pear orchards with trees 30, 40, maybe even 50 feet high. They really are the most majestic and cathedral-esque elements of the countryside. It truly is a wonderful sight. And these traditional perry pear varieties here, they're named after local villages such as Blakeney Red. They can be named after individuals. One that comes to mind is Judge Amphlett, named after a court judge in Worcestershire. They can also be named after individual properties and farms. And here at Greg's Pit in 𝗪𝗏 in Herefordshire, there is the Greg's Pit pear. In fact, here it is, and this is indeed the original, the mother tree. This is not a grafted tree. This was the original variety from which all Greg's Pit perry pear trees within the local vicinity have been grafted subsequently from. Now, Greg's Pit, it's not a broadly utilised variety. It's quite local. It provides some moderate acidity. It's got some nice, gentle, grippy astringency and tannin in there. But what a wonderful thing to be able to see this circa 300-year-old tree still surviving, still blooming, still producing fantastic fruit, and still making amazing perry. Perry has been documented for around 500 years or so and sits alongside cider in those classic texts of the mid-17th century, when cider and perry was at its highest zenith, treated like a fine wine, drunk by nobility and by royalty, a most wonderful drink, quite possibly even turned into champagne perry by the likes of Lord Scudamore in Herefordshire. A really, truly wonderful thing. But certainly as we get into the 20th century and the latter part of the 20th century, a lot of the knowledge and the understanding about these varieties and about these trees begins to be lost. But thanks to one particular individual, Mr. Charles Martell of Gloucestershire, we have that understanding. Charles is probably more famous for his cheese and his Stinking Bishop cheese especially. And of course that has a link to Perry too, for Stinking Bishop is the name of a pear variety, 𝗲𝗏, a lovely acid-driven pear. And indeed that Stinking Bishop cheese gets its name because it's rind washed in Perry, helping that wonderful bacterial action, giving all that wonderful pungency. It's he who in the 1980s and 1990s, he went out and spoke to all the old farmers and the last bits of knowledge from the Long Aston Research Station to understand what these varieties might be. And he found that information and he took cuttings. And these varieties continue today, largely thanks to the action of him and other key individuals within the 3 counties. There are over 100 different documented Perry pear varieties from England and Wales, and every single one of them has their own unique story and character, flavour profile. They really, really are entirely unique. Behind me here is a wonderful variety called 𝗏𝗏, and you can tell it's a 𝗏𝗏 because of the shape of the tree, that weeping willow element to the branches. It's a very, very tannic variety. It's quite a late season variety. It drops its fruit quite early, but it's still rock solid. The old saying goes, gather your 𝗏𝗏s one year, mill them the next, and drink them the year after. You have to collect the fruit in around October, November time, leave them to press until January, ferment and mature, and leave a whole year before drinking it, such is the intensity of that tannic profile. But it's the individual flavour and sensory characters that make all these individual Perry varieties so unique. That blend of acid, tannin and sugar gives you a whole range of spectrum of different flavours. Now, unlike the West Country cider apples, which have a classification system based upon acidity and tannin to give you sweet, sharp, bittersweet or bitter sharp, no such thing formally exists for Perry. However, I colloquially like to try and introduce some form of idea of what we're working with, and so I have 3 different categories based on acid forward, tannin forward or fruity forward. So in terms of more acid forward varieties, we're talking about 𝗲𝗏, thorn and gin, zesty, bright and vibrant. When we're talking about tannic driven varieties, we're thinking about Oldfield, about 𝗏𝗏 and about rock, things like that. And when it comes to the fruitier varieties, we're thinking about New Meadow or Blakeney Red or Aylton Red pear. So I've done a lot of talking about Perry thus far. Now it's time to do some tasting. And what better location to be tasting some wonderful drinks than here at the cidery on this wonderful press here. I'm going to be tasting, thanks to Greggs Pit, their fantastic Blakeney Red, 𝗏𝗏 and Oldfield. Now, we described that Perry can come in many different formats, but truly, I think that the best way for this drink to be presented, the real magic comes with when it has an in-bottle fermentation. So let's have a try. Come on now. Ready? Oh, gentle, delicate, just like me. Let's have a go. Doesn't that look an absolute picture? Now, this is but one interpretation of Perry, but I think it'd be fair to say, in the main, Perry presents itself as a slightly lighter, leaner, more elegant, delicate and more floral drink than its West Country cider cousins. You can slightly see that on the coloration as well. It's a little paler. Very often the Perrys inflect green or pinkish coloration in there as well. I would say this definitely sits a little bit more on the greener end of the spectrum. Now, Perry, unlike apples, doesn't just contain malic acid, which is the crisp and the sherbety characters. It also contains a proportion of citric acid, just like you get in citrus fruits. And that extra type of acidity helps to incorporate other types of aromas and characters. Let's have a go. Gosh, on the nose, it's absolutely glorious. It's brimming with elderflower, with jasmine, and with a light, brisk, grapefruity character. It's absolutely gorgeous. And to taste, what's sail to you? Oh, it's a gloriously balanced and harmonious drink. We're getting some really nice, sort of zesty, almost juicy mineral acidity, which I would 𝗏𝗍 is coming from the Oldfield. We're getting that really lovely, juicy, sort of fruity and sort of skin, pear skin kind of character from the Blakeney Red. And then we're getting that robust, strong backbone from the 𝗏𝗏. this is a bit of a masterclass in what blending is all about. You can do perries as single varieties. In fact, they work really, really well as a single variety, as an exponent of that individual flavor profile. Blends such as this can be absolutely magnificent too. Gorgeous. Cheers. So one of the questions I very frequently get asked is, what is pear cider? Or what is the difference between a perry and a pear cider? From a technical legislation point of view, there is no difference between the two terms. They pertain to fermented pear juice. But people have very strong opinions about perry, and especially about the term pear cider. They think it's a made-up term, and to a large extent, it is. It was developed in the 1990s by producers who wanted to make a fermented pear drink that didn't have the connotations with what that was synonymous with. And we're talking about Babycham, we're talking about Lambrini, we're talking about Country Manor, all those fantastic drinks, which maybe once upon a time had some integrity, had some value, had some joy. But certainly, by the time we got into the 1990s, had been really devalued. So the presentation of a drink that, not exuding an old heritage, being something more modern and contemporary, and to be drunk and appreciated as such. So there are people who say you can only call something a perry if it's made from traditional perry pear varieties. And I can understand that. As a corollary to that, there are some producers who make a fermented dessert pear drink, predominantly in the southeast of England, utilising Conference or Williams or 𝗪𝗋, those kinds of varieties, who don't want to tread on the toes of traditional perry makers, so they will call it their pear cider. There is also another tranche of thinking that cider equals apples, perry equals pears. Regardless of the pear variety, if it's a fermented pear, it should be called perry. Generally, the decision is up to the individual producer to try and advocate what their product is all about and who they're trying to advocate it to. Today, perry accounts for a very, very small part of the overall cider category, less than 4% by volume. Once upon a time, it was bigger than that, but it never reached the heights of cider. It never became a big, very large volume drink consumed nationally. Why? There's a few different reasons. First of all, the fruit itself. It is a fickle beast. Variously, it could be so soft and squidgy that as soon as you take it off the tree, it splats and you can do nothing with it at all. Also, there are those varieties, like the aforementioned butt, whereby they come off the tree so early and they're absolutely rock hard. To make a perry from an overripe piece of fruit will give you all sorts of problems down the line, lots of potential for acetic acid and things like that, vinegar kind of characters. Conversely, to make a perry from a very underripe fruit gives real hard, harsh, very unpleasant characteristics. So the harvesting of these fruits is not a particularly easy thing. Secondary, we have in terms of the fermentation, the maturation, the making of the drink, although ostensibly you make it in the identical way and fashion to cider, because perry contains this citric acid, that can be converted into acetic acid without the presence of any oxygen at all. So you can do everything right. You can make sure that your perry is perfectly clean, that you've topped it up to the brim, there's no air in there, you've given it a little kiss and a hug every night before you go to bed. Very good. But then you wake up the next day and it has turned into something that should be more likely to be spread over your fish and chips. Not very nice at all. And this is what happens with perry. It is so gentle, it's so fickle, it's really, really challenging to use. It also suffers from another terrible affliction called mouse. And if you are lucky enough to have never had a cider, or especially a perry, with this fault, with this taint, then you are a very lucky human indeed. It's caused by certain kinds of bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, and quite possibly Brettanomyces yeast. And it helps to precipitate a very, very unpleasant, fousty, musty, mouse cagey action at the back of the throat. It is not pleasant at all. So it's very susceptible to infection, considerably more so than cider. And the final component that makes perry a drink that has never reached the heights of cider is this proportion of unfermentable sugar called 𝗬𝗵𝗲. And this 𝗬𝗵𝗲 is contained within all pears. To a greater or lesser extent, sometimes it means that your perry is just off dry. Sometimes there can be quite a large proportion of it. Now, if consumed in large quantities, it has been known for this 𝗬𝗵𝗲 to have an unwanted laxative effect. If you have ever been visited by the Perry Fairy, you will know that they arrive quite quickly, unannounced, and in a timely manner. Not a very pleasant experience. The old saying around here goes, Perry goes down like sunshine, round and round like thunder, and comes out like lightning. Now, that's not to say that a sip of a drink such as this is going to have such a dramatic effect necessarily, but it is a consideration and something that has impacted and impeded Perry's presentation to the larger mass of consumers, I would say. So where does that leave Perry today? Well, like I said, it accounts for a very small proportion of the drink sector, and a large proportion of that Perry that is made from concentrated pear juice. It wouldn't be anything akin to the tradition that we have here, or those fantastic drinks made with dessert fruit down in the southeast of England. It's a drink that's largely unknown. The majority of people just don't know that this drink exists, and it can be so joyous and provide this wonderful array of flavours. To go down to the pub and to find a traditional Perry is an incredible rarity indeed. And even 10 or 15 years ago, the opportunity for these drinks was a little bit greater, being a little bit juicier, naturally a little bit sweeter. The proliferation of flavoured ciders that has come into the marketplace over the course of the last 15 years has definitely reduced the opportunity for people to purchase these kinds of drinks. If a pub is going to have something a bit sweeter and a bit fruitier, it will go for those drinks rather than these. And that's a little bit of a challenge. What we do know is that with thanks to 𝗪𝗲 and their festivals and their championing of real cider and perry over the course of the last nigh on 30 years plus, is that those festivals and those approved pubs are an absolutely integral and vital outlet for these kinds of liquids, these kinds of products. Without 𝗪𝗲 and its long-standing campaigning for this fantastic traditional drink, I would attest to the fact that a lot of producers would have stopped making. A lot of these wonderful traditional orchards would have ceased to be because they would lose their viability. So thank you to 𝗪𝗲 for their endeavours and their continuing efforts. Thank you to you, all the drinkers who know about this drink and who tell all of your friends about it. And of course to the perry makers themselves. Thank you for continuing to uphold this culture, this heritage, this tradition. I would say thanks to Westerns, not normally somebody who would be champion amongst 𝗪𝗲, but to their absolute credit, they continue to make a traditional perry today, taking fruit from within the 3 counties, these wonderful perry pears. They give a lot of viability to these orchards going forward. So thanks to them. And to the wealth of smaller producers, the likes of Greg's Pit, here just down the road from Westerns, making the most finest expressions of the terroir and of the culture and of the heritage of this landscape. And so what a story Perry has to tell, spanning centuries and featuring mere mortals and the gods themselves. The best of British drinks, a wonderful heritage, a wonderful tradition, a wonderful drink. But it is in peril. It isn't being consumed. These orchards are being lost. Perry needs your help. So please, whenever you go to the pub, ask for perry. Whenever you go to the bottle shop, ask for perry. When you're searching online, buy perry. Go visit these perry producers, learn about it, shout about it. So let's make sure that perry is around for generations to come so that they can celebrate this wonderful culture. Wassail!